Hi, everybody. We are going to start The Great Gatsby today, and I really hope you like it because it's one of my favorite books. Now, it's not one of my favorite books to take out and do some mindless reading because there's a lot in here. But every time I read this book, I find something new and something different. And then kids write about different things, and I'm thinking, oh, you're right. There are hidden jokes in here, there are so many symbols and symbols that appear in chapter one will then appear later in chapter five, and it's just a really, really put together book. So hopefully you looked at the cover art for your annotated bibliography because it's really, really interesting. And you know that there are women in the eyes. You know that we have a single teardrop here. You know that this is Coney Island. And so it's really, really interesting cover art that was done for this book. And again, many layers in this that we'll talk about later. Now, let's go here to Google Earth. So the book takes place in New York City. So here's the whole state of New York. And down here is the city of New York. Now, let me zoom way in because a lot of the book takes place in New York City. Oops. Ooh, I don't know if I can get it. Um, and then used to be able to just grab it, but I don't think I can do that anymore. Um, this right here. Oh, come on. This right here is Great Neck, Long Island. Here we go. Right here. And here is Manhattan in New York City. And this is pulling up Queens, which we spend some time in. But right here is Great Neck, Long Island. And it's interesting because if we look at this map of the Great Gatsby, um, it was based on this area. So here are West Egg and East Egg, which are the settings. And Fitzgerald based the setting of the book off of this real place. Now, one thing I want you to look at is how green it is out here and how gray it is in here. And so they travel a lot from East Egg and West Egg, and they go into New York City and Manhattan. This is all, I mean, you can see Central Park. Central Park's green, but there's a lot of concrete here and a lot of development. But out here, it's green and it's lush and it's beautiful. And this book is about rich people. And so it's kind of hard for us to imagine a life of being completely rich and not having to worry about a thing. But that's the lives of many of these people. Tom and Daisy Buchanan, so wealthy. Jordan Baker, so wealthy. And that's really important to remember when we think about this book. Okay, so I'm going to use Project Gutenberg in Australia because Gatsby officially doesn't become public domain until next January. So there isn't a Project Gutenberg. There isn't a released version online. You can find illegal ones. But since the school has already purchased enough copies for everybody in the school, I don't feel so bad about using this webpage to read it. I wish you had a book in your hand, and I think you can get them on Amazon, but I sure won't require it, and who knows how long it will take to ship while we're in this craziness. So, chapter one is very, very difficult to understand, and I'll try to explain a lot as we go through. So, um, really pay attention. I may chop this video up a bit and do it in 20-minute segments because it does take a long time to upload these videos. So we'll start with The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald and start with chapter one. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, Just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. He didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way, and I understood that he meant a great deal more than that. In consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments, a habit that has opened up many curious natures to me, and also made me the victim of not a few veteran bores. The abnormal mind is quick to detect and attach itself to this quality when it appears in a normal person, and so it came about that in college I was unjustly accused of being a politician, because I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. Most of the confidences were unsought. Frequently I have feigned sleep, preoccupation, or a hostile levity when I realized, by some unmistakable sign, that an intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon. For the intimate revelations of young men, or at least the terms in which they express them, are usually plagiaristic and marred by obvious suppressions. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. I am still a little afraid of missing something if I forget that, as my father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat, a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. And after boasting this way of my tolerance, I came to the admission that it has a limit. Conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on. When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform and had a sort of moral attention forever. I wanted to no more riotous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn, period. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. This responsiveness had nothing to do with that flat, flabby impressionability which is dignified under the name of the creative temperament. It was an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness such as I have never found in any other person, and which is not likely that I shall ever find again. No, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. Okay, this part is so difficult, and there's so much to talk about. And for one thing, we get a lot of clues that Nick Carraway, who will be the narrator of our book, is an old money man. Old money, let me go over here. Old money. Let me put this down. Okay, so there are, and this used to be such a huge, huge thing. Old money means money has been in the family generations, and no one has to work for the money anymore. And this includes Nick. So when his father tells him, whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. His dad's telling him that a lot of people grew up without manners, without culture, without dignity, without lessons in etiquette. But that wasn't Nick. And Nick even says, if I can find it, oh, now I can't find it. But anyway, Nick says that he doesn't judge other people. And because he doesn't judge other people, people open up to him all the time. People tell him everything. They tell their secrets, probably bad secrets, because Nick doesn't go and tell everybody else. Nick keeps things pretty much to himself. And you're going to see that throughout the book. While Nick does have his his flaws, he definitely is a pretty good guy. So he even says his father snobbishly suggested, and he snobbishly repeats, that a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth, meaning we don't all get these fundamental decencies. So let's think about this. Fundamental decencies. Well, first of all, what's fundamental? Fundamental means a base or core or of central importance. So these decencies, and what's a decency? Decency is just behavior that conforms to accepted standards of morality or respectability. So to Nick, his his manners, his etiquette are fundamental decencies. And if that is core of being a respectable person. And that's what Nick says that he has and he does. Now, Nick comes to understand something through the book. And when he says that conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on, what he's talking about is that he learned some things from this book. That not everybody has these fundamental decencies, including the rich. And Nick realizes that it doesn't matter how much money you have in order for you to be a good person. Now, Gatsby, we're not going to meet him officially until chapter 3. Gatsby's going to be a mystery to us. And we already know from this paragraph right here that Gatsby's already dead because Nick's talking about him in past tense. He says, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. Well, the end of what? It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. So something preyed on Gatsby, and that's really important. Now, dust is one of the first symbols that we see, and you're going to notice things covered in dust all the way through, but not everything's covered in dust. You're never going to see dust at Tom and Daisy's house, but you will see dust in other places, which is kind of important. Okay, so that's a lot. So these two, so this beginning down to here sets up Nick's life in New York City, and he wants to be everyone's friend, and everybody likes to have Nick as friends because he doesn't gossip and he doesn't make people feel bad about the choices that they made. All of us make a wrong choice at one time or another, and nobody, none of us are perfect, but Nick never makes anybody feel bad about their choices. Nick's really good about making people feel accepted, and that's why people seek him out to tell him all their secrets. And that's why sometimes he's feigned sleep, he says, which means pretended to be asleep so he doesn't have to listen to people unload on him. Okay, so let's talk about Nick Carraway. He is the narrator, and he is old money, meaning he doesn't have to work for it. He's from a very wealthy family. We're going to find out from where later. People confide in him because, as he says, he doesn't judge. Okay, so that's what we know about Nick so far. Okay, let's go on a little bit further before I take a break. My family have been prominent, well-to-do people in this middle western city for 3 generations. The Carraways are something of a clan, and we have a tradition that we're descended from the Dukes of Buccleuch. But the actual founder of the line was my grandfather's brother, who came here in 51, sent a substitute to the Civil War, and started the wholesale hardware business that my father carries on today. Okay, just a little explanation. Here's where we get Nick's new or old money. His grandfather's brother founded this hardware business, and his grandfather's brother, who came here in 1851, he was rich enough to send a substitute to the Civil War. Now that's actually a slam by Fitzgerald, because can you imagine being rich enough to hire some poor soul to go fight for you in the Civil War? And that just shows pretty much arrogance and snobbishness and uncaring about his poor fellow man. And so that right there kind of says a lot about the kind of people these rich people are. I never saw this great uncle, but I'm supposed to look like him, with special reference to the rather hard boiled painting that hangs in Father's office. I graduated from New Haven in 1915, just a quarter of a century after my father, and a little later I participated in that great delayed Teutonic migration known as the Great War, and everybody knows that. So while Nick's father, or I'm sorry, grandfather's brother, hired a substitute to the Civil War, Nick himself actually went and participated in World War One. It's kind of an indication Nick's a pretty good guy. I enjoyed the counter raid so thoroughly that I came back restless. Instead of being the warm center of the world, the Middle West now seemed like the ragged edge of the universe. So I decided to go east and learn the bond business. Everybody I knew was in the bond business, so I supposed it could support one more single man. All my aunts and uncles talked it over as if they were choosing a prep school for me, and finally said, "Why, yes," with very grave, hesitant faces. Father agreed to finance me for a year, and after various delays, I came east permanently, I thought, in the spring of 22. Okay, so Nick, he, whoops, fought in World War One. Um, Restless when he came home, and he wanted to go east, meaning to New York City. Now, another reason why we know that he's very, very old money is because his whole family gets together. And so he wants to come and sell bonds. Well, we're in the middle of the roaring 20s. Remember this from history when everybody was buying stocks and bonds, and Nick wanted to come and be on the stock market. But when all his aunts and uncles talked it over, definitely shows that they're old money because the whole family gets together. Is this going to look good on the family, or is this not going to look good for the family? Now, it's important to remember Nick's going to tell you all the time that he's poor. But right here, his father agreed to finance me for a year. Nick's an adult. He's been through college and he's been to the military. And he's basically throughout this book going to get an allowance from his dad. Kind of weird. But his dad has said, "Yeah, I'll take care of you for a year. We'll see if you make it." And he was allowed to move to New York City in the spring of 1922. Okay, so now Nick's in New York City. The practical thing was to find rooms in the city, but it was a warm season, and I had just left a country of wide lawns and friendly trees. So when a young man at the office suggested that we take a house together in a commuting town, it sounded like a great idea. He found the house, a weather-beaten cardboard bungalow at $80 a month. But at the last minute, the firm ordered him to Washington, and I went out to the country alone. I had a dog, at least I had him for a few days until he ran away, and an old Dodge and a Finnish woman who made my bed and cooked breakfast and muttered Finnish wisdom to herself over the electric stove. So here's Nick. He's going to get a roommate, and he's actually going to get a roommate out here on. Oh, my computer's so slow. Out here on West Egg, okay, which is here. But the guy that he was going to get in a house with got called away, so he couldn't move with Nick. It was lonely for a day or so. Well, oh, one thing I wanted to say is here's Nick. So here he is. He's going to talk about how poor he is all through the book. His dad's financing a year, and he hires himself a maid. Good for you, Nick. It was lonely for a day or so until one morning some man, more recently arrived than I, stopped me on the road. How do you get to West Egg Village? He asked helplessly. I told him, and as I walked on, I was lonely no longer. I was a guide, a pathfinder, an original settler. He had casually conferred on me the freedom of the neighborhood. And so, with the sunshine and the great bursts of leaves growing on the trees, just as things grow in fast movies, I had that familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer. There was so much to read, for one thing, and so much fine health to be pulled down out of the young, breath giving air. I bought a dozen volumes on banking and credit and investment securities, and they stood on my shelf in red and gold like new money from the mint, promising to unfold the shining secrets that only Midas and Morgan and Maecenas knew. And I had the high intention of reading many other books besides. I was rather literary in college. One year I wrote a series of very solemn and obvious editorials for the Yale News, and now I was going to bring back all such things into my life and become again that most limited of all specialists, the well-rounded man. This isn't just an epigram. Life is much more successfully looked at from a single window, after all. It was a matter of chance that I should have rented a house in one of the strangest communities in North America. It was on that slender, riotous island which extends itself due east of New York, and where there are, among other natural curiosities, two unusual formations of land. 20 miles from the city, a pair of enormous eggs, identical in contour and separated only by a courtesy bay, jut out into the most domesticated body of salt water in the Western Hemisphere, the great wet barnyard of Long Island Sound. They are not perfect ovals like the egg in the Columbus story. They are both crushed flat at the contact end, but their physical resemblance must be a source of perpetual confusion to the gulls that fly overhead. To the wingless, a more arresting phenomenon is their dissimilarity in every particular shape and size. So he's talking about these two peninsulas right here. He's talking about West Egg and East Egg. Mm, I lived in West Egg, the less fashionable of the two, though this is a most superficial tag to express the bizarre and not a little sinister contrast between them. My house was at the very tip of the egg, only 50 yards from the Sound, and squeezed between two huge places that rented for 12 or 15,000 a season. The one on my right was a colossal affair, and by any standard, it was a factual imitation of some Hotel de Ville in Normandy, with a tower on one side spanking new under a thin beard of raw ivy, and a marble swimming pool, and more than 40 acres of lawn and garden. It was Gatsby's mansion. Or rather, as I didn't know Mr. Gatsby, it was a mansion inhabited by a gentleman of that name. My own house was an eyesore, but it was a small eyesore, and it had been overlooked, so I had a view of the water, a partial view of my neighbor's lawn, and the consoling proximity of millionaires, all for $80 a month. Across the Courtesy Bay, the white palaces of fashionable East Egg glittered along the water, and the history of the summer really begins on that evening. I drove over there to have dinner with the Tom Buchanans. Daisy was my second cousin once removed, and I'd known Tom in college, and just after the war, I spent 2 days with them in Chicago. Okay, so let's talk about East Egg and West Egg. So, oh my goodness, my poor computer is so slow. No. Okay, so West Egg is here, East Egg is here. Now, Nick describes West Egg and East Egg. Okay. He described this as the less fashionable. So, what this means is it doesn't mean poor because West Egg, Nick is there, and Nick is in a little tiny house. He's renting for $80 a month. That's really nice. But other houses beside him are mansions, and these places rented for 12 or 15,000 a season. Now you've got to remember, a lot of people in New York City didn't own their own property because they rented apartment buildings and whatever. And so sometimes people own these houses, or sometimes they went out here to get away from the city and rent a house just for the summer. Can you imagine renting a house for $12,000 a season? $12,000 for the summer. So it's super rich. But the reason it's less fashionable is because these people are new money. Now, what this means, um, prior to the 1920s, maybe a little bit before, the only celebrities we had in the world were those who were politicians or kings and queens and nobility. There were no movies. There, I mean, there were plays, but how many people see a play at once? And so there were no celebrities. And so this whole idea of being old money meant that you're going to be related to nobility. So when West Egg is described as less fashionable because it's new money, you got to think about all the new industries that are opening up in the 1920s. We have now have movies. We've never had movies before. Movies have never been a thing for people to enjoy before the 1920s. And now that we have movies, we have this whole new crop of movie stars. But not only that, we have a whole new crop of industry. Movies need directors, movies need producers. Um, and so we have this new crop of new rich people. Now, if I were to hit the lottery today and win $50 million, that's great. But I don't have the etiquette and I don't have the manners of somebody that's super, super wealthy. I'd be new rich. I don't really understand those unwritten rules of wealth. And so that's really important in this book. And remember, Nick said the fundamental decencies are parceled out unequally at birth. So people that are new money are not going to have the manners of old money people. Now, Nick then describes East Egg, and he talks about the glittering palaces of East Egg. What do palaces indicate to you? Palaces are from kings and queens, the celebrities. And because the people that lived at East Egg are old money and super, super rich, but these guys are old money. So they've had money in their family for generations. And some people, let me make this about East Egg and West Egg in a different color. So some of these people are, I forget what I was going to say, but they are very old money. And oh, I know what I was going to say now. These people, come on now, Tom and Daisy Buchanan. Now, Nick's related to Daisy. It's Daisy's his second cousin once removed. But Tom was a friend of Nick's at New Haven. And hopefully you know what college is there. Probably not. It's Yale. So Nick went to Yale a long time ago. Get out of here. Nick went to Yale a long time ago. And then now he's just reconnected with Tom and Daisy Buchanan, who now live on East Egg. So that's all we know about them so far. Okay. So I promise as we go, we're going to read more and explain less, but let's stop there for now so I can get this one uploaded. Maybe. I don't think it wants to. Come on. Well, there we go. Okay, so hang on and I'll get the next part uploaded here shortly.